So, we have one more little bit of Star Wars news to talk about, and that relates to a really interesting article that I read today about Mark Hamill. And he was talking with someone during, I think, a podcast, and he specifically says what I find to be not only yet another moment of him taking a shot at Last Jedi, but it also is kind of telling as to how I think the folks behind that film were kind of plowing their own road. They kind of put their blinders on. They had a direction they wanted to go, and they just did not want to hear anything from the outside. They were just going to stay the course no matter what. And as we saw with the result of Last Jedi and some, problems there, it wasn't a great movie. I mean, we just reacted to Rise of Skywalker, which is going to be up on the channel and the Facebook feed, so go back and check that out. But you see Leia's last moments, essentially what's Leia's last moments in that film. And Mark specifically had an outline for what he thought the ending of Force Awakens should be, which I think would have kind of thrown Last Jedi in a different direction. And we wouldn't have ended up with the film in Last Jedi had they went with Mark's idea for Force Awakens, which I'm going to talk about right now. Having said that, I don't necessarily agree with everything Mark said. I'm not a big fan of his entire concept, but I do like some of it. So Mark's idea was he thought that the end of the end of Force Awakens should still have been him at the very end. So if you remember The Force Awakens, they talk about Mark coming back. He's going to be an aged Luke. It's going to be years later. He's kind of the elder Jedi character, which you're seeing right there in that screen. So that's all the same. They knew that. But they never really told us how much he was going to be involved. And if you watch Force Awakens now, you know he's not in the film at all. He makes one appearance in one shot at the end for like 10 seconds where Rey hands him his old lightsaber, which it's an awesome scene. I love that scene. The music builds. It's full of nostalgia because you have this new character, Rey, who goes through her whole adventure in the film. She finally finds Luke, which is like the last remnants of the original trilogy, the original films, and as a fanboy for me, seeing those two elements come together is awesome. It's like the old and new, and he's holding the lightsaber, and he knows all the memories tied up in it, everything he went through with it. Of course, that's Anakin's lightsaber as well, so you got the whole prequel trilogy tied up in it. And then, of course, what happens in the first scene in Last Jedi, he throws it over his shoulder like he doesn't care, and it's this they turn it into a comedic moment, which sucked. I hated that idea. I hated everything they did with Luke in that film, and Mark did too. Mark's idea was to still keep Luke in the Force Awakens to just the end of the film. But his idea was a callback to the original trilogy, so he wanted Leia to accompany the troops to, I guess, the Starkiller base at the end and then get captured. And then Luke was going to come in disguised as a stormtrooper and be with this other group of stormtroopers. And as they went to, I guess, go to execute Leia, this mass stormtrooper just turns on him, starts shooting him. He blasts him and kills him. And then the stormtrooper takes his helmet off, and you realize it's Luke. And he basically says to Leia, "Hey, sis, I'm here to rescue you," which is a callback to the first film. That's exactly how they first meet in the original trilogy, if you don't already know. And if you don't know, why are you watching this? It's Star Wars. Go watch Star Wars. But, and then they were going to so he was going to save her. Then it still kind of sets up the reaction or the meeting with him and Rey later on. He still gets to be kind of the elder Jedi. He's basically the Yoda of the new trilogy, and he still can be in that capacity for the next film in training Rey. And the other reason why he thought that was important was that way Luke and Leia could both be on Starkiller base when Kylo kills Han, which is very key to his scenario. Because his rationale is it would be much more impactful for two people that had a stronger connection to Han instead of Rey and Finn. And yes, Chewie's there too, but Rey and Finn are essentially the characters that witness it, and they react to it, and they're heartbroken and fine. But would it had been more impactful for Leia and Luke to see that. Yes and no. And here's why I think that works and it doesn't work. The first part of his scenario, I think, is a little bit hokey. I don't think that a grown Jedi 30 years later pulling off his stormtrooper helmet again, I think that worked in the context of the original film because he's this young farm boy, inexperienced, kind of all shucks, not really knowing a lot about what's going on in the galaxy. And for the most part, in the first film, he's just kind of along for the ride. In the the second and third films, that's where you really see that he gets he's a little more worldly, I guess you could say. So I don't think that the whole stormtrooper callback thing would have been a good idea. I do love the idea of Luke and Leia being the ones that witness Han getting killed, because there's the thing where obviously Leia seeing Han die, that would have been heart-wrenching, but then Luke's there, not only as Han's friend, but he's basically seeing the person that he's responsible for killing, like basically his ex-apprentice killing his best friend. That would have been impactful, but it would have meant more, I think, for people like me who grew up on both trilogies, the prequel and the original trilogy. It would have been a cool moment for me. From a storytelling standpoint, I don't really know how they would have gotten out of that, because how would Luke have not just went nuts and killed Kylo? I mean, he probably would have did that. Plus, that would have you would have taken away the duel between Kylo and Rey at the end of the film. And as you can see on my shelf right here, I actually have a Rey figure. That is her from the battle at the end of Force Awakens with Kylo in the snow. That scene probably couldn't have happened if Luke and Leia were both on Starkiller Base. They could have did something else, but that probably threw Luke and Kylo together a little bit too soon. They had that little bit of a showdown at the end of Last Jedi, which was pretty cool, but not what I would have wanted to see. Even if they had held it to the third film and made it even a more epic battle, I would have liked to seen that. I'm thinking, like, if you think back to Revenge of the Sith, the fight between Obi-Wan and Anakin at the end, or even the fight with Yoda and Palpatine in the Senate chambers, those are badass fight scenes. I would have liked to see something on par with that with Luke and Kylo, and that just didn't happen. So I think the battle at the end of Force Awakens between Rey and Kylo was probably the best version we were going to get of that, and I don't think that Mark's version, it kind of would have taken that away, and that would have sucked. But on the other hand, it would have put a different spin on Last Jedi and would have sent Last Jedi in a completely different direction. And as a fan and everything that I've ever read about Last Jedi, most people would have wanted a different direction for Last Jedi. But anyway, you can't look back. I mean, it is what it is. Last Jedi is not a bad film. I still like parts of it. It's fun for me to still go back and watch. So I'm not going to kind of try to rewrite history too much on that. I just thought that was a funny little story that Mark had. But again, it goes to show you, Mark was not happy with how they did Force Awakens, and I don't blame him, because he clearly on more than one occasion gave notes and said, look, this is where I think you were just wrong. And they didn't listen to him. They didn't care. They just stayed the course. And now that J.J. Abrams has taken back over, and also what we know is that J.J. Abrams has specifically consulted with George Lucas on where this should go to end it and how things should be wrapped up permanently. So I think you're going to now see a more well-rounded Star Wars film that looks like it's going to call back to the original. We just saw in the Rise of Skywalker trailer, and by the way, if you haven't seen Rise of Skywalker, the teaser, this is going to be a little spoilerish, so if you haven't seen it and you want to see it, you better click off now. But I mean, to be honest, I was already spoiled about this before I ever watched the trailer, and it was by accident. I wasn't even trying. So you probably already know that Palpatine looks like he's making a return. So how they're going to wrap all that up and how that relates to the Skywalker storyline, I'm really excited to see. But we got JJ back, we got George involved, which I'm not a fan of George as much as a director, but as a story guy, George Lucas, you can't touch him. And that's exactly the role he should always be in. And the fact that he's consulting on the story and then JJ is moving forward with his vision, that's what I want. And I'm really excited about that. And we will see come December.